Thank you for joining Wars of the Rosies as we continue with part 4, the disappearance of William Morgan and the anti-Masonic excitement which followed all over the United States. From the Story of Freemasonry by W.G. Sibley. The disappearance of William Morgan and the anti-Masonic excitement which followed all over the United States. The Masonic Order in the United States met with a misfortune in 1826 that seriously crippled it for 20 years. In the fall of 1825, there came to Batavia Genessee County, New York, a man named William Morgan. He was an operative Mason by trade, an indulger in strong drink, and of bad disposition. If a regular Mason, it has never been disclosed where he was made one, although he received the capitular degrees in Leroy, New York, on the avouchment of a Mason in good standing before the local bodies. Before this man's habits were known in Batavia, he was permitted to sign a petition for a new chapter of the order, but because of discoveries made afterward, which reflected upon his personal character, another petition was drawn and his name left off. This angered him, and he set about the work of attempting an exposure of the secrets of Freemasonry, visiting frequently a man of literary culture in New York City who had been expelled from the order in 1824, and taking as a partner in his venture at Batavia, newspaper editor named Miller. All concerned in the scheme expected to be made independently wealthy by the sale of the projected publication, and while it was being surreptitiously printed in Miller's office, advertised it in a way designed to excite the indignation of Freemasons generally. During the night of September 10, 1826, the printing office was fired, presumably by Miller himself, as he had plenty of water standing about the barrels and tubes with which to extinguish the flames, and the incident was used industriously as a further advancement of the forthcoming publication, which on examination proved to be but a copy of a previously printed book in England. On the following day, Morgan was arrested on a charge of larceny said to have been committed at Canandaigua, 50 miles from Batavia. He was taken there, tried, and discharged, but immediately arrested for debt and thrown into jail. His wife, learning this, went to Canandaigua, prepared to secure his release, where she learned that his New York indebtedness had been paid, and that he had been arrested again on the suit of a Pennsylvanian creditor and taken away. She was greatly alarmed by this information, hastily returned home, and her friends dispatched a man to trace him. The messenger came back with the very distressing news that when Morgan was released from jail, he had been seized by 2 men, who thrust him into a carriage while he shouted, "Murderer!" and drove off with him to a place afterwards learned to be about 3 miles from Rochester. This was the last ever seen or definitely known of the man, who had disappeared as completely as if swallowed up in the bowels of the earth. His abduction was at once, and probably with justice, regarded by the public as the act of Freemasons, and a great sensation ensued. The governor of New York, D. Whit Clinton, himself a Mason, was appealed to and did all in his power to discover the missing man and apprehend his captors, as did many other prominent members of the fraternity, but all in vain. Meanwhile, the public, stirred to frenzy by the publication of false stories in which Morgan was made the victim of a secret tribunal acting in violation of law, and executing a horrible sentence on the man who professed to have exposed secrets, refused to accept the protestations of admittedly respectable and honorable Freemasons that his disappearance was not an act determined upon by the Masonic organization, but persisted in denouncing Freemasonry as a whole and demanding victims for their fury. In April 1827, several men were arrested for compliance in the affair, tried and sentenced to imprisonment. The next month, 17 others were arrested and tried on a charge of removing the missing man to foreign parts, but were acquitted. The following October, more than a year after the celebrated abduction, the putrid body of a drowned man was found on the beach of Lake Ontario, about 40 miles east of the Niagara River. A political campaign in which anti-Masonic prejudice ran high was in the midst of its emotional course, and the claim was made that the body was Morgan's. His widow viewed it and then positively identified it, although the clothing on it was not that he had worn when he disappeared, and a coroner's jury solemnly declared it to be the remains of William Morgan. The funeral was seized upon by designing politicians as the occasion for a big demonstration to influence the voters of citizens in the approaching elections, and was attended by thousands whose imprecations and curses made the burial a travesty on the services that should accompany the interment of human remains, and turned the ceremony into a remarkable exposition of partisan rancor. The Freemasons who vied with their enemies in honest efforts to secure and punish the men who made away with Morgan did not believe his widow's identification of the body was correct and insisted an investigation. They learned that a man named Monroe had been drowned in Niagara River some weeks before this corpse had been found, and by questioning his widow and son, elicited the fact that the clothing he had worn on the day of his death was the same as that found on the body claimed by Mrs. Morgan. Thereupon another inquest was held, and the body, proven beyond a doubt to be that of Monroe. An anti-Masonic political party had been formed in Western New York while these events were happening, its avowed purpose being to drive from public office, if not from an honorable connection with society, every Freemason. It polled 33,000 votes in 1828, 70,000 in 1829, and 128,000 in 1830. Spreading over a majority of the northern states, in 1832 it nominated a candidate for president against Andrew Jackson and Henry Clay, as both of them were Freemasons and past masters. The campaigns in New York and Pennsylvania on the Masonic issues exceeded in venom any ever known in the country, not excepting those of the Civil War period. Masons were excluded from churches and their children were denied the privileges of the schools. But the presidential election of 1832, only one state, Vermont, was carried by the Anti-Masonic Party, and after that blow to the hopes of its misguided followers, it steadily declined in numbers and influence, and in a few years dwindled into insignificance and finally nothingness. The most distinguished American citizen who practiced in the political persecution of Freemasonry during these years was ex-president of the United States, John Quincy Adams. He was greatly disturbed over the disappearance of Morgan and wrote a series of letters and delivered an address in which his great ability and a deep-seated prejudice, remarkable in a man of his experience and culture, were given in full play in bitter denunciation of the fraternity. He declared that Masonry ought forever to be abolished. It is wrong, essentially wrong, a seed of evil, which can never produce any good. The existence of such an order, he said, is a foul blot upon the morals of a community. The code of Moloch, homicide, embraced in the laws of Masonry, will pass to its appropriate region in pandemonium, and one of the sources of error and guilt prevailing in our land will be exhausted and forever drained. In line with the foregoing is a verse from a popular campaign song of the time, set to the tune of Auld Lang Syne, which ran as follows: If aught on earth can men engage, if aught can make us free, 'tis one successful war to wage against Freemasonry. The Mason's dark design we know, the Mason's bloody grip and sign, will lend a hand to blot from earth the Mason's bloody shrine. The disappearance of Morgan should never have been made a political issue, because if he was executed under a Masonic penalty, the debt was not done by the authority of that order, but by hot-headed members of it acting independently of any lodge and contrary to the fraternity's laws. But in the passions which then excited reason, found little place, and everything Masonic was discriminately condemned. Like Monroe's body, anything was a good enough Morgan that would fan the flames of the persecution of Freemasons among their bigoted enemies. Accepting the constant opposition to Freemasonry wherever Roman Catholic authority is obeyed, and the trifling efforts of a very few weak Protestant churches, there is now comparatively little prejudice against the order in the civilized world. America is singularly free from criticism of it, and but one English author during the past quarter of a century is worthy of quotation as a critic: Charles William Hackett Thorne, in his work on secret societies of all ages and countries, says, "Selfish, an eye to business, vanity, frivolity, gluttony, and a love of mystery mongering. These are the motives that lead men into the lodge. The facility and frequency with which worthless characters are received into the order, the manner in which all its statutes are disregarded, the dislike with which every brother who insists on reform is looked upon by the rest, the difficulty of expelling obnoxious members, all these too plainly show that the lodge has banished Freemasonry. Of true Freemasonry, Freemasons as a rule know nothing. Genuine Freemasons are liberal-minded and enlightened men devoted to the study of nature and the progress of mankind. Moral and intellectual, men devoid of political and religious prejudices, true cosmopolitans. The Right Reverend Henry C. Potter, Bishop of New York in the Episcopal Church, in 1901 wrote a letter in which he said, "Freemasonry, however, is, in my view of it, a great deal more than a mutual benefit association. In one sense, wild and extravagant as the words may sound, it is the most remarkable and altogether unique institution on earth. Will you tell me of any other that girdles the world with its fellowship and gathers all races and the most ancient religions, as well as our own, into its brotherhood? Will you tell me of any order that is as old or older, more brilliant in its history, more honored in its constituency, more picturesque in its traditions? Today it lies in the hand of the modern man, largely an unused tool, capable of great achievement for God, for country, for mankind, but doing very little. For one, I believe that circumstances may easily arise when the highest and most sacred of all freedoms being threatened in this land, Freemasonry may be its most powerful defender, unifying all minds and commanding our best citizenship. Under such circumstances, fellowship in it should be regarded more and more as a sacred privilege, for which our best youth should be trained, and which they should be advanced step by step through preparatory forms and degrees. The great Edwin Booth said, "In every realm of thought, in all of my research and study, in all my close analysis of the masterpieces of Shakespeare, in my earnest determination to make these plays appear real upon the mimic stage, I have never and nowhere met tragedy so real, so sublime, so magnificent as the legend of Hiram. It is substance without shadow, the manifest destiny of life, which requires no picture and scarcely a word to make a long-lasting impression upon all who can understand. To be a worshipful master and to throw my soul into that work, with the candidate for my audience and the lodge for my stage, would be greater personal distinction than to receive the plaudits of people in the theaters of the world." Thank you for watching, and please don't forget to share, like, subscribe, and comment. And if you can, please consider donating to Wars of the Roses. Links to PayPal and Patreon are in the description. Thank you so very much.